Major funding for Frontline is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide.
Tonight on Frontline, hunger in America.
I have people right here on the list. They have 10 and 12 children in the family, and there's not a quart of milk.
Everywhere we went, we saw hunger. Hunger has returned to America and is widespread.
Why are these people hungry? And what should the government do?
That's all I got for now.
Tonight, the story of bread, butter, and politics.
From the network of public television stations, a presentation of KCTS Seattle, WNET New York, WPBT Miami, WTVS Detroit, and WGBH Boston. This is Frontline.
Good evening. I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight, the conflict between basic human needs and political realities. Hungry people, we've all seen the news reports. Bread lines, soup kitchens, men, women, and especially children. Compassionate people of all political persuasions want to know, why does anyone go hungry in this country? What can be done to help? And does the government help or hurt the situation? 3 separate commissions were formed to study these questions. They agreed on only one thing: there are hungry people in America. But after months of study, listening to similar testimony, with access to the same facts and figures, there was substantial conflict in their findings and recommendations. Why? Tonight you will see those commissions in action, and you'll see how a complex and emotional issue like hunger gets caught in the political process, and whether, after all the debate and discussion, those in need are any better off. We call the program Bread, Butter, and Politics. It is produced by Chris Jeans and reported by Charlie Cobb.
America is the most bountiful country in the world. Our farmers constitute only 2% of the population, but they grow so much food that we only eat half of it. The rest is sold abroad or stored. But despite America's great bounty, according to a recent Harris poll, 23 million people in this country are hungry. Some people don't believe there's that much hunger in America, and the issue has sparked sharp political debate.
The Citizens Commission was set up at the behest
18 months ago, a group of doctors from Harvard University, led by Dr. Larry Brown, set out to examine the hunger question in detail.
Basically, everywhere we went, we saw hunger. We would go into soup kitchens and see young children sitting there with their parents, and almost invariably, they were 1 or 2 years older than they looked to the physicians. Their teeth would be rotting out, or their hair would be coarse and not shiny, which is, again, a symptom of inadequate nutrition. We find that poor people stretch their food dollars as far as they can, but in doing so, because they by definition don't have enough of the right kinds of foods, they will eat all sorts of things which taste good, but in fact are not. They eat excesses of starches, carbohydrates, in order to fill their stomachs, but they don't get good quality foods, so that there's an apparent paradox there where hungry people are fat, but indeed those people are some who are suffering the most.
Our mandate, developed by religious and social service agencies and emergency food pantries, is to hold hearings in each New England state and to collect data and information to try to understand both the size of the apparent increase in hunger in our region and at the same time to try to understand what, if any, are its health consequences.
The Citizens Commission on Hunger in New England was the banner under which the Harvard doctors investigated hunger.
On your AFDC check, your welfare check, what do you get for 4 children and yourself?
Over a period of 18 months, they made home visits, held public hearings, collected data, and conducted medical examinations.
And you said that she was born a little early. You said about 2 weeks or so, or even more, maybe. Looks like she's doing pretty well. How much does she weigh now?
In the third world, we're used to seeing the baby with the big tummy, the children who have diseases called kwashiorkor or marasmus. We don't have that in this country. What we have in this country is silent undernutrition. Lay people cannot often see the undernourished elderly people or the children, but a child who weighs 25 pounds and should weigh 35 has a significant proportion of his or her weight loss, and that's a serious, serious problem, but oftentimes that just simply looks like a skinny child.
While the doctors were conducting their investigation, President Reagan reacted to press reports and sent a memo to Ed Meese, his counselor, saying he was perplexed about persistent stories of hunger in America. He asked Ed Meese to establish a task force to examine food aid programs.
I would like to begin our session by introducing the other members of the task force.
The President's task force on food assistance was composed largely of persons sharing the President's outlook. Its chairman was Dr. James Claiborne LaForce, Jr., Dean of the Graduate School of Management at UCLA, and an old ally of the President when he was Governor of California. The Executive Director, John Razian, a former student of Chairman LaForce, is an economist at the Department of Labor. The one Democrat on the task force was Edward King, the conservative former governor of Massachusetts. Most task force members, like Betsy Bryan Rollins, appointed at the request of Senator Jesse Helms, were part of the conservative Republican network. The president's political opponents quickly made it clear they didn't trust the commission.
If you're saying, do I expect recommendations that are going to really address that need in a meaningful way, I would say no, but I'll wait to see what the recommendations are going to be before I jump to a conclusion.
I think that people should hold their judgments until January when we do our report, and then make a conclusion as to whether or not we are a biased group, because it'll be the report that'll speak for us.
Senator Kennedy decided not to wait for the president's task force report. He set up his own commission.
You have to make some hard choices between electricity and heat and food, I guess, don't you?
Yes.
All three commissions traveled around the country, and they all heard much the same thing.
It's really upsetting. It really is.
Okay, well now, how much then do you figure that you have to feed the 3 children, yourself and your mother?
Including food stamps or without food stamps?
Yeah, including them.
Okay, at the most, it'd be $60, including food stamps.
Is that $60 a month?
Yes.
Have you ever run out of food?
Yes.
When the president's task force held hearings in Kansas City, the responses of some witnesses were heated.
I have people right here on the list while we're sitting here, don't even have a crust of bread. They have 10 and 12 children in the family, and there's not a quart of milk. Hey, there's nothing to cook on, no lights, no gas, no water, but to even go to the bathroom.
I've been living in the state of Michigan since 1947, and I have never in my life seen such a damn mess and no answer to it. People going hungry, people on the streets, standing in food lines, wanting something to eat. And before I forget it, I just want to tell you that if you do make it back to Washington, you tell Reagan that. Well, he don't seem to know it.
Why? Why, I ask, do we have to suffer the embarrassment and degradation that accompanies the hungry times we face constantly? Why doesn't someone do something to rid this great country of ours of hunger? Shame on the government and shame on the state. We can help feed people in foreign countries, but we're not doing a very good job here. There's something wrong here.
It's a different crop of people nowadays. It's not the derelict looking for food. It's the strong, able-bodied men and women that are out of work Not because they want to be out of work, because there's no work out there.
It is not working anywhere. There's as many people hungry in Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey, Mississippi, Alabama as there is in Kansas City, and all of Kansas City.
In brief, the message given all three commissions was simple.
We are hungry.
Senator Kennedy spent 5 days on the road. His conclusion:
much of the problem and much of the solution can be found in the same place, federal food programs. They are, in a sense, old programs. They are, in the best sense, liberal programs, and most of all, they are programs that are working. They showed that we could solve the problem of hunger, not by throwing money at it, but by spending money on it. There is no such thing as fighting hunger on the cheap.
After months of investigation, the Harvard doctors found a serious hunger problem.
We made several findings. First of all, it's clear that hunger has returned to America and is widespread. Secondly, it's a growing problem. There's no indication that it's beginning to tail off as the economy reportedly gets better. In other words, we are still seeing an ascendancy of hunger. Thirdly, hunger is having an effect on health and well-being of people. We are seeing increases in malnutrition among certain population groups, particularly the most vulnerable, elderly and young children and infants.
All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay.
The president's task force traveled around the country for 7 days and reached different conclusions. They acknowledged that there are some hungry people, but said they couldn't find out how many or whether their numbers are increasing. They were unable to determine the seriousness of the problem. Nevertheless, they found that federal food aid programs are adequate. Criticism of the report was instant, and one of the critics was himself a member of the task force. John Driggs, the former Republican mayor of Phoenix, was concerned that the report did not seem to reflect the evidence they had collected while on the road.
My great concern about the report is that it does not seem to address the multitude of specific problems that were raised in hearing after hearing.
When Dr. Brown heard the conclusions of the president's task force, he expressed dismay.
It's difficult to know how people could come together in good faith and produce a document which says we don't know whether hunger is widespread or not. It's there, but we don't know if it's widespread. We don't know if it's growing. And we think that the budget cuts have not had any effect on it. It simply is not plausible.
Other experts criticized the task force report, including the president of Tufts University in Boston, who served under Republican President Richard Nixon as chairman of his White House Conference on Food and Nutrition and Health.
It was not a competent report. They did not know how to get the data. They did not know what programs had worked and hadn't worked before. And they produced a report which I think is going to be basically, which is already forgotten.
How was it that the president's task force report differed so radically from the investigation conducted by the Harvard doctors? In this report, we'll travel with both commissions. As we look at what they saw and what they didn't see, it helps to begin with the federal government's most important food aid program, food stamps.
Then this food stamps department has you bring in so many verifications for everything. I think they'd rather feed computers than to feed the people. You know, we need to have less hearings and people need to be fed. This is really genocide and it's really got me upset.
The food stamp program cost $11 billion a year. It helps feed 22 million people, including 10 million children.
This last weekend, you know, we were down doing some shopping. We might have wanted to stop and have a Swenson's ice cream sundae. I've done it before, but we didn't do it because we couldn't. And, you know, when you have a hard day, you might want to have a glass of beer, or if it's hot, you might want to have a Coke, and you can't do it.
The reason John Block missed his beer and ice cream is because last summer he decided to show that a family of 4 could live all right on food stamps. He was under fire from critics who charged that the food stamp program was inadequate. As Secretary of Agriculture, John Block runs the food stamp program. So, with his wife and the media in tow, Block went shopping. He had $56.62 in his pocket. That's the top weekly rate. Most people get less. Mr. and Mrs. Block took the groceries to their home in a suburb of Washington, D.C., and a week later the secretary pronounced the food stamp program worked just fine.
I report that it is enough food.
Poor people say, however, Block's excursion only proves that if you're rich enough, living on food stamps for a week is easy.
What did he live on? What did he eat? He only lived on it a week. We have to live on it a month. Have him try living on it for a month, and then tell me how he made out.
Yeah, anybody can manage on food stamps for a week, for one solid week. But try to do it a month, pay your rent when welfare department only gives you a certain amount of money for your rent, and your landlord goes up $200 a month extra. You know, where do you get the extra money? You either pay your rent or starve.
But what they give you for a month. And I sat down one day to figure it out, and it came to $1 a day per person. And how do you give one person 3 meals a day on $1? It's very difficult.
Well, they only last about 2 weeks, and then you don't have any left. You know, you have to feed 7 people for $248. It isn't much money.
$248 a month for 7 people means that Mrs. Kruger and each member of her family gets 39 cents per meal. She relies entirely on food stamps. But the program was set up to provide only supplementary food income. As a result, Mrs. Kruger, like many recipients, runs short toward the end of every month. More and more people, the President's task force learned, rely entirely on food stamps.
Like us, there's 8 of us. And we run out of food before the end of the month. And as God is my judge, the kids and us have had to eat canned turnip greens, tomatoes, anything that we had left. And I don't believe that's fair. Thank you.
After hearing much testimony on food stamps, the President's task force recommended a $500 million increase in food stamps. In other words, an increase of a penny per meal per person per day.
The average for the food stamp program as a whole is 47 cents per person per meal. If you want to put things in those terms, it's just 1% of 47 cents. So it would be a number like a penny more per day, per meal, per person.
The recommendation of the President's task force would increase food stamp assistance per person per month by less than 70 cents a month. It's laughable. We believe that the evidence shows that there has to be a 25 to 30% increase in food stamps for recipients, because recipient households invariably run out of money the last third to a quarter of each month.
It's judgment, and all you can say is that the greater amount allows an individual to more flexibility in diet.
If people are hungry because they don't have enough money, and you give them money which can only be used for food, which is what food stamp is, they stop being hungry. It's a dumb, simplistic answer, but the fact of the matter is it has been shown to work.
The political debate over hunger is about how much the government should or should not do. President Reagan believes private agencies and charities should help feed the hungry.
My testimony today is on behalf of the Boston Food Bank. When we opened our doors in May of '81 in a new warehouse, we were able to distribute 1,000 pounds of donated food to 30 agencies that first month. Now, 2.5 years later, we have 320 members, and we will distribute close to 1.5 million pounds in this year alone. We're in the Boston Food Bank, and this particular room represents a salvage reclaim program that we're doing. What we've done is to hook in with about 40 supermarkets in New England. Every week, these supermarkets glean all the dented cans, the slightly damaged package, the dirty things. They go to the Brockton reclaim plant and they package it in banana crates. And I would say we get between 10 and 30,000 pounds of slightly damaged goods each week. And our job here at the food bank, one of our many jobs, is to sort this salvage and, as you see, put it in boxes by category to make it available to the agencies to shop.
The 320 agencies are the local soup kitchens and food pantries which give the food to the poor. The food bank sells food to the agencies for only 10 cents a pound. That helps cover their cost.
Over here, we have a representation of the other kind of donations that the food bank gets. I would say most of our donations come from the private food industry. People like Dannon, Quaker Oats, General Foods. And here we've got a pallet of each of the donors, say 20 this week at the food bank. All of this food gets donated not because it's inedible or spoiled, but because there are some kind of processing or manufacturing or marketing glitches. A label may be on upside down. In these cases, the Quaker Oats is a really good example. When it's shipped to a Star Market or any supermarket, if it falls off the truck and gets slightly damaged, here's a good example. It got slightly squished, but this is perfectly good to eat. A supermarket, however, will not accept it.
To see for themselves, the President's task force visited this food bank here in Kansas City.
The real reason that we received this is because they meant to package it in plastic bottles. The instructions say to squeeze on hamburgers, and you'd be hard-pressed to squeeze this on anything.
The growth of food banks all over the country is dramatic evidence that federal food aid programs aren't coping. In the last 3 years, 80 new food banks have been set up in our major metropolitan areas. Originally designed to help people in extreme emergencies, like floods or fires, today, food banks face a continuing emergency.
One local agency told me the good news was their food supplies have doubled in the last year, and they're delighted about that. But the bad news is the number of people which have been asking for food has quadrupled. So they're turning away half of all people who come to them asking for emergency assistance. The other fear locally in Kansas City is that it's no longer emergency assistance. It's being relied upon as income maintenance or food maintenance. In the past, we used to see people who truly had fallen through all of the cracks, and now we're seeing more people who are relying on emergency food, in quotes, all the time.
I would say the last 3 years, especially since Reagan's budget cuts have filtered down to the state and local level, we've been seeing unprecedented increases in hunger. Our pantries, places where they give groceries to families that just literally don't have anything in the refrigerator, those places in the last 2 years have reported between a 100 and a 300% increase.
In line with the President's view that private agencies should help feed the hungry, his task force recommended the government make it easier for corporations and farmers to take tax deductions for their charity.
Private sector in our country is not set up to help run public food programs on sort of a pro bono basis. And we were told over and over again by people in the industry that there was not much more that industry was likely to do and oftentimes could do.
Private food assistance, and we need to encourage that, make it more effective, can never substitute or take the heaviest burden from an effective federal food assistance program.
The food collected in food banks is distributed to soup kitchens and food pantries. Mary Brailsford and Carolyn Remy have come to the Boston Food Bank from their soup kitchen in Quincy, a town 8 miles from Boston, to pick up their supplies.
About 2.5 years ago, we began to see more and more of hunger, homelessness. I'm feeding people now. We come here, we volunteer to do this. We are not paid. None of the people that you see here tonight are paid, but it's very hard for us not to do this. I'm seeing mothers with children, and more come all the time. But we try to make it as homey and as personal as we possibly can, and let them keep their dignity.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Wendy and Jennifer. Happy birthday to you.
Nowadays, in towns and cities across America, it's the new poor, unemployed workers, families, who come to soup kitchens in increasing numbers. They never thought they'd be reduced to such circumstances. To ease their indignity, Mary and her colleagues don't call this a soup kitchen. They call it a free restaurant.
The kids think this is a restaurant. They call it their restaurant. They don't know this is a soup kitchen. We wouldn't tell them.
Well, I first learned about Quincy Community Action Center when I lived in the car. I was put out in the street, and I had nowhere to live. And Father McCarthy at the St. John's Church got us in a motel. Then we got an apartment, and then we came here, and they help us with food when we have no money. Me, my husband, and my 5 children were sleeping in a car. I mean, the kids were so scared, they used to say they didn't know if they were going to wake up in the morning, sleeping in the car. We used to have to sleep like in Howard Johnson's parking lot or anywhere you could find, where there was light and you knew they were open for protection, that the police watched,
Now settled in an apartment, Mrs. Kruger and her family still don't have enough money to buy food. Her food stamps always run out before the end of the month, so they've been coming to the free restaurant for 7 months. But today's visit is a first for Sherry Marcotte, who needs more than a meal and food. She needs a can opener.
Sherry doesn't have a can opener. She doesn't have any food. She doesn't have a home. Up until this morning at 9 o'clock, she was in a shelter.
Well, I'm homeless. I can't find anywhere to live. I'm on the housing list right now. I'm number 2 on the priority list, which I should get an apartment in the next month or 2.
Get some more cereal, Leo.
Homelessness and hunger are 2 faces of poverty.
Okay.
Sherry can be housed and hungry or homeless and fed.
No.
I couldn't afford to pay the rent. It was so much, and I only get $379.20 a month, and the rents they want are just $350, $375.
I just don't think that children should be hungry. And if we can break down an office and have a stove and feed them, then we will. And if people don't like it, or if people think that we're not doing our job, my staff works 60 hours a week. But if we choose to do this, we're going to do it. But it's not going to solve anything. I know that. I don't know how many soup kitchens are going to go up before somebody stands and fights. I just hope what I'm doing now will make people think when they vote. And think about the other side. People who, through no fault of their own, are hungry and homeless.
What gravy? Little gravy. No salad? No salad. No salad. You want some rolls? Please. 1 or 2.
My brother's table here in Lynn, Massachusetts, is a more typical soup kitchen. It does not call itself a free restaurant. It's open 4 nights a week and on Sundays for lunch. Tonight, only 160 people were expected. More than 240 showed up. Perhaps the most startling of these images of poverty is the presence of children among the unemployed, the deinstitutionalized, and the alcoholics. Every night, Jane Holapa greets them outside.
Are they? How many more are coming tonight? 3 at least. So there'll be 5 of you all together? Yeah. We just want to make sure you eat every night. Every night we're open. What about you? I see you here every night too.
Yeah, I know.
Huh?
Yeah.
Is your mom and dad having a hard time too?
Yeah.
It helps them to have you down here eating, doesn't it? They know you get a whole meal, huh?
Yeah.
Why doesn't your mother come? I haven't seen her.
She's embarrassed to come here with all these people.
Yeah. But are you trying to talk her into it?
Yeah. I'm going to try and ask her to come tomorrow.
What do you have?
3.
You have 3 kids?
Yeah.
There's 2 and that one over there.
There's one more over there. Come here. Yes, Sonia, come.
And how often do you come?
3 times a week. Come.
Come when you need to come.
Yeah, when I don't have no food in the house, though.
Food stamps aren't enough?
No, it's not, you know. This will last you 2 weeks, you know, and it's it, you know.
Why is the baby crying?
She needs something to eat, wants something to eat.
Yeah, she's hungry, huh?
She wants fishy. No fishy, no fishy.
So are these your 2 kids?
No, this one is my niece. And then this one is mine. My daughter hasn't swallowed her pride yet.
Oh, your daughter won't come? That's too bad.
She hasn't swallowed her pride yet.
Father God, I thank you that you love us, and that you sent your Son for us, and that you show your love to us in many ways. I pray you'll bless us as we eat this food and bless this food. Thank you for providing for us, Lord God. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Unaccompanied children are now regulars in the soup kitchens. Even when their parents are too embarrassed to come themselves, the children, knowing little shame, show up. This soup kitchen, the Stew Pot in Jackson, Mississippi, is run by local church groups. It's housed in a former gas station. It serves hot meals Monday through Friday. By popular demand, they decided to open on Saturdays for sandwiches. But today, some of the kids only got potato chips because they showed up too late for their sandwich. Do they come often?
Very often. About 10 days of 10 days through the weeks are just 5 years. 5 days. 5 days.
And what do they get for breakfast?
Nothing.
University.
When the task force visited Kansas City, they were guided by the mayor, Richard Berkeley, himself a member of the task force. Not everybody in soup kitchens wanted to talk about food.
How often do you get to eat a day? It varies.
Often, like I say, often. Because, see, right now, I got my man on a job.
Yeah.
I can't find no job, but I just come on down here and eat and go back out and
keep looking.
Keep on looking for what I can do. I'll take anything. Anything come along, I don't care what it is.
Hunger, recession, and unemployment are intimately connected. Men searching for work are found in soup kitchens from the deep south to the deep north.
I've been out of work for about 6 or 7 months. From Missouri, St. Louis. Went down to New Orleans to find some work, couldn't find it down there, so I came up here. Still looking.
When did you last eat?
Yesterday morning.
Went down to Westlink Creamery, Coca-Cola, Pepsi and Chelsea. Went down to the GE, everybody hollering. I've been down to down on the Linway. Can't get nothing. I need me a job. I want to work. I can't stand it. I can't stand being out of work. I can't take it no more.
When the president's task force was in Jackson, Mississippi, they began the day having breakfast with the governor in his mansion.
Good grits. Got some good grits and ham, right, eggs, good Mississippi breakfast.
Beautiful home. Beautiful home.
Where do we go
It's
now?
one of the oldest residents for governors in the whole state, in the whole country. Well, we've got 5 minutes to get started.
It was the 5th day in a row the task force was on the road. They had just minutes to spare to make it to another hearing. Unlike Kennedy and the Citizens Commission on Hunger in New England, the task force never went to people's homes. Mississippi is the poorest state in the Union. In Jackson, the poor are easily found. If the task force had visited Patricia the day they were in Jackson, they might have gone to the grocery store with her.
I went to Joe's store and I bought a quart of milk, which was $1.88, and a loaf of bread, which was about 67 cents, and a bag of rice, which was 87 cents. And the only reason I go there and get it is because I don't have any money, and I go there because he'll let me get it on credit until I can get some money to pay for it.
Food prices at the local store are much higher than at the supermarket. But like many poor people, Patricia uses the local store. She has no transportation, and her local store will give her credit. Credit is vital. Oftentimes, her refrigerator is empty.
That's all I got for now. Bologna, cheese, and butter, 2 cans of milk, and some lard. So far. Well, so far I got some onions, barbecue sauce, sugar and milk, and salt and ketchup, Tabasco sauce and black pepper.
Today, Patricia, 3 months pregnant, had her usual breakfast.
We ate some rice and gravy this morning and bologna. I eat whatever's left on the plate. Whatever they don't eat, I eat. Like if they leave some rice and stuff on the plate, then I take it and rewarm it and eat it myself.
Every month, Patricia gets $60 in assistance given to single mothers for child support and $139 in food stamps. In Patricia's world, hunger is the constant companion of poverty. Although the task force didn't visit anyone at home, they heard from people who spend their lives among the poor.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, my name is Dr. Aaron Shirley. I'm a practicing pediatrician. We see at our clinic too often the empty refrigerator shelves towards the end of the month. We encountered a family of 12 only yesterday.
And how many children?
8.
8 children. Do you get food stamps?
Mm-hmm.
Whose food stamp allotment usually runs out 7 to 10 days before the end of the month.
Now, after the food stamps run out, about what part of the month?
About the 3rd week. Usually by the 3rd week, they run out on the 3rd week.
And you have about a week where you don't have any.
Mm-hmm.
When we asked what do they do then, the answer was the best we can. We asked if the children go to bed hungry. Do any of your children ever go to bed hungry?
Yeah, sometime. Yeah, as long as I got food stamps, they don't. When my food stamp run out, they have to be home. We don't have no other choice.
There are times, we were told, the children's diet consisted of bread and water.
Dr. Aaron Shirley has been taking care of very poor people in urban and rural Mississippi for nearly 25 years. Back in the late 60s, he took part in the now famous Field Foundation survey, which revealed the extent of hunger and malnutrition in the nation.
We found in many, many areas, especially in rural areas and in rural Mississippi, hundreds of children who were overtly malnourished. Their growth was stunted. They weren't growing. They had very little energy. Subcutaneous tissue was diminished. Many had the pot bellies due to the weakness of the abdominal muscles. Some children we saw actually were starving very slowly.
10 years later, in 1978, Dr. Shirley took part in a follow-up survey by the Field Foundation.
The politicians were beginning to grumble about how much the food stamp program cost. They were considering cutting back.
In 1978, the doctors found something different.
We found families, and we did revisit the same communities, and we found families who were just as poor. Many of them were even worse off in terms of income, living conditions, shelter, environmental. The homes were 10 years older than they were when we saw them the first time, and they had not had any repair, so they were actually worse off. But the children were not as hungry. They weren't as malnourished. And the only thing that had changed was the fact that the families had the benefits of food stamps, the school lunch program, school breakfast program. More children were participating in Head Start and daycare programs. And so the children were getting a more nutritious diet, and they were much better off nutritionally.
Now, 5 years later, in 1983, Dr. Shirley is again reporting on the poor.
In our clinic, 70% of 5,000 children certified annually for the WIC program have home dietary histories deficient in vitamin A and C. What we are seeing, and hopefully the task force will be made aware of it, is that there are more people in need of the benefits of the program. There are more people who are poor now in terms of absolute numbers.
Hunger's returned to our country because of three things coming together in a relatively short period of time. The first is that America's safety net has always been weak, and it's gotten severely weaker over the last decade or so. Low-income families now have over a third of a loss in income. That is, in real dollars, they have 36% fewer dollars to spend than they did 10 years ago. Second reason, of course, is that we had a very bad economy, a very bad recession. We have 8 million more unemployed people today than we had only 3 years ago. And unemployment is still higher today than it was 3 years ago. And it got up to the highest since the Great Depression. The third thing is that during the time that these two factors were coming into play, we instituted the most severe budget cuts in nutrition programs in the history of our country. So while need was peaking, the response to it, in fact, was declining.
According to the Congressional Budget Office, $12.3 billion have been cut from federal food aid programs. Nevertheless, from the beginning of their investigation, Chairman LaForce appeared predisposed toward the view that budget cuts had no impact on hunger.
It doesn't appear to be a significant impact. It's just not explainable by that. No.
For him to argue that is like saying that unemployment has had no effect on hunger. Poverty has had no effect on hunger. Clearly, the budget cuts have had an effect on hunger. I mean, we have data which clearly shows a direct association, a direct link between budget cuts and hunger.
When the task force announced its recommendations, Chairman LaForce still hadn't been persuaded otherwise by what he and the task force saw during their travels. He still denied that the Reagan budget cuts had any impact on hunger.
We don't share the opinion that the modifications in the programs and the budgets have hurt those people who are in the poverty group.
Okay, and then we push really hard.
Can you tell us anything about the changes you've seen in the children over time as you've worked with them, individual children?
While the political debate over hunger is argued, the doctors on the Citizens Commission express concern that the increase in hunger has led to an increase in malnutrition, and malnutrition in young children can lead to growth failure.
A child's brain, you see, in the first several years is very, very much like a construction site. There is very fast building going on. In fact, 80% of brain development takes place in the first 3 to 4 years of life. And we have to be very, very worried about children who do not get adequate nutritional intake during this time of rapid brain development. We have evidence that there are significant numbers of children coming into Boston City Hospital who are malnourished. We conducted a study to determine whether or not a disproportionate number of children there were failing to thrive, were experiencing malnutrition or growth failure. And in fact, found out that we had about 3 times the number of children that we would expect to have in the lowest percentile of growth. So the answer to your question is yes, there is a definite and significant proportion of children who are being cared for at the hospital who are malnourished.
On January 9th, Chairman LaForce cautiously told reporters his commission found no real evidence of malnutrition.
One measurement of hunger would be the malnutrition issue. And there is no evidence of this in the country, given the monitoring system that we have, which might be inadequate.
For 10 years, the federal government has had a program designed to prevent malnutrition in the young. The Women, Infants, and Children program, known as WIC, has been set up in clinics all across the country so that pregnant mothers and children can get enough highly nutritious food. At this one in Boston, Massachusetts, the first 2 clients of the day were clearly in need of help.
He is almost a year. He's about 10 and a half months. He is just 12 pounds, 12 ounces today. An average boy would be 21 pounds.
It is 7 pounds 15 ounces and his length is 20 inches long. He has a measurements of a newborn baby. So he's 2 months old. He should be weighing at least 10 to 12 pounds and being around 22 inches long. So he's really under the standards.
When she was pregnant, this mother was not on the WIC program.
I really think she was malnourished because she didn't have all the nutrients she needs during pregnancy. She was lacking all the main nutrients that she needs due to the low income that she's receiving.
There are 3 million expectant mothers or children that are taking advantage of that program. 6 million who are eligible who can't because the resources aren't there. And that is being replicated and duplicated all across the country.
In their final report, the task force recommended the WIC program be refunded at its present level for another year.
Of all the dumb ways to save money, not to feed children is just about the dumbest you can have. Not to feed pregnant women is the only one that's even dumber. There have been some good evidence showing that $1 spent on the WIC program saves $3 in health costs. Now, the cost of a premature child being taken care of in a hospital is $400-600 a day. And it really doesn't take that many days of care of premature children to take care of the food bill for a lot of young pregnant women.
The facts about hunger are not anecdotal, but overwhelming. There is clear, undeniable, and authoritative evidence of widespread and increasing hunger in America.
In his report to the Senate, Senator Kennedy concluded that a new effort by Congress is essential if America is to fulfill its commitment to the hungry.
The 16 steps I recommend in this report will cost approximately $2.5 billion a year, or only 1/20th of the $50 billion increase the Defense Department is seeking for military spending in the next year alone.
Senator Kennedy completed his investigation into hunger last Christmas and submitted his report to the President's task force.
We have communicated to the task force our own findings and our own recommendations, and we hope that they'll give some consideration to them.
I haven't seen them. I haven't read his report. I have no comment.
They were presented to the task force.
Yes, but I have no comment on them. We have our report, and it speaks for itself.
Oh, I see. So you haven't paid any attention to his recommendation?
I haven't read it. Our staff has, and some of our members have, and we feel it's very inadequate.
On January 26th, the President's task force testified before a joint hearing of the House and Senate. By then, it was known that the task force had never traveled as a complete group, nor did the task force meet as a full body except twice, in the beginning to be sworn in, and at the end to vote on its final recommendations. And those recommendations were largely written by its staff in Washington. The result? To some congressmen, it seemed, the President's task force knew little more about hunger in America than when it began its investigation.
I know we talk about this difficulty of quantifying, and yet it seems to me that there are facts that are out there that are pretty clear for everyone to see. The Commission itself referred to the food assistance programs that are currently active. Food stamp programs serving some 21 million people in this country. The mayor's testimony that they found soup kitchens, the increase for demand of food in their area is up 95% last year, and I think 70% of the cities say it's on the increase this year. Isn't that the way you quantify? the hunger problem right now? I mean, you're not going to have a test tube or a monitor in everybody's stomach in the country.
That's certainly evidence that the system is responding to needs, yes, and it's evidence that people are receiving meals. It doesn't tell us how many people are not receiving meals.
No, but doesn't it tell you that if that many people are dependent on that kind of program, that there is a serious problem in this country?
It tells us we were having a serious recession. That certainly does.
Did you approach the questions with preconceived answers? Did Mr. Meese or did anybody in the White House give you guidelines on any of your conclusions? Or would you say that the conclusions that you reached represent a fair and impartial view of those at this panel without any White House pressure?
Absolutely. I met with the White House people on one occasion before we had a session, obviously. They asked me to be the person to chair this task force. I met with them briefly. I saw Mr. Meese perhaps for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and have not seen him since. And I might say that I think that we're unfairly judged as being a group of conservative individuals from one persuasion who are going to come at this with preconceived notions.
You say, what evidence is there of clinical hunger in our country today? The United States does not have the kind of continuous national nutritional monitoring system that could give us a complete answer to that question. And then you go on. We have been unable to substantiate the allegations of rampant hunger. We cannot report on any indicator that will tell us by how much hunger has gone up in recent years. And then you conclude that for the vast majority food assistance programs, efforts are available and sufficient for those who are able to take advantage of them. Well, as Mr. Panetta pointed out, there are some pretty good indicators that things have gotten worse in the last 4 or 5 years. It's a little bit like Justice Black once said in a famous decision on defining pornography. It's the same way as defining hunger. You know, they tried to define it, and Black finally said, well, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it.
There is an unfinished agenda on this food assistance issue. That the very fact that there seemed to be such a negative reception from those who deal most closely with the problem all over the country. Sure, there are advocacy groups, and perhaps that's their role, to keep the negative pressure on. But the fact that there was such a negative response, I think, gives us some indication that were we to do it again, we might approach it a little differently.
I think it's very important to remember that the food programs of the United States were not some vague giveaway program worked out by leftist governments. The food programs in the United States were installed under the Nixon and the Ford administration. They were put together by a coalition which included the farmers, the food industry, the religious organizations, as well as unions and people interested in the poor. There was a very general recognition that it was a national outrage that we had too much food on the one hand and hungry Americans on the other.
We can end hunger in 6 months in the United States simply by going back and using those very successful federal programs that virtually ended hunger in the 1970s. They worked extremely well. The WIC program, the food stamp program, the school lunch and school breakfast program, and the elderly feeding programs. These are bright spots in America's history. Government at its best, programs which actually worked. And simply by going back and strengthening those programs that have been weakened over the last 3 years, we could virtually end hunger in our country.
The White House Task Force report on hunger was severely criticized. Both the National Governors Association and the U.S. Conference of Mayors rejected it as inconclusive and inadequate. Despite repeated requests by Frontline, no administration official was available for comment on camera for this program. But in its 1985 budget request, the White House asked for still another cut in food stamps. And since the task force report was issued after the budget proposal, the modest increase in spending on food programs, which the Commission recommended, was not included. Recent public opinion polls show two things. Americans do believe hunger is a significant problem in this country, and they believe President Reagan's cuts in social spending have hurt many people. That perception has been called the fairness issue, and in this election year, it's a major concern for the president's campaign, along with arms control, El Salvador, and the federal deficit. So, in addition to the hunger task force, on each of these issues, the administration has also formed a commission to study the MX missile, the Kissinger Commission on Central America, and the Grace Commission on government spending. All have released reports supporting the White House, leading critics to charge the commissions were simply political maneuvers to justify existing administration policy. And perhaps because of the negative publicity surrounding the Hunger Commission's report, White House officials have now been quoted as saying that this particular task force was a mistake. Next week on Frontline, a story of communication between two superpowers at a very personal level.
3 young American students go to Russia on a whirlwind tour. They debate the issues of war and peace. Soviet reaction to the Americans, laughter, questions, disbelief.
But that is not right. That is not the way it is. Everything you are saying, that is not true.
A rare glimpse of how we see the Russians and how they see us.
We call the film A Journey to Russia. It is next week on Frontline. I'm Judy Woodruff.
For a transcript of this program, please send $4 to Frontline, Box 322, Boston, Massachusetts, 02134. Frontline is produced for the Documentary Consortium by WGBH Boston, which is solely responsible for its content. Major funding for Frontline was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding was provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide. For video cassette information about Frontline, write to PBS Video, Box 8092, Washington, D.C., 20024.